The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. The Center for Autism and Related Disorders advises working with a board-certified behavior analyst who has experience with autism before starting any intensive behavioral intervention. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod. We're webcasting to you live from the Center for Autism and Related Disorders headquarters in Tarzana, California. It's Wednesday. I love Wednesday because in just a few moments we're going to be joined by Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh. It's time for Ask Dr. Doreen. And today's Dr. Doreen is very special. As promised last week, we are going to have Dr. Granpeesheh go through the new autism criteria in the DSM V for us, and you have the opportunity to ask questions. So I'm going to have Emily cycle through all the different ways that you can connect with us and the different ways that you can watch the show. I'm going to remind you that the only place to watch us live is still www.autism-live.com. When you go there, there's a lovely white box that we're keeping active all the time around the clock now. You can ask your questions in real time by just typing in whatever you want, hit enter, and it shows up magically on my screen right here. So if you want to ask Dr. Doreen about the DSM-5, you want to express some opinions about it, have something clarified, and as she's talking about it, if you want some more information or to express an opinion, go ahead. It's open season right now on that feature. Without further ado, it is time for Ask Dr. Doreen.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh is the
Dr. Doreen is an expert in autism.
Doreen Granpeesheh.
Dr. Granpeesheh.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh.
Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh is a visionary in the field of autism, and now you get to ask her questions on Ask Dr. Doreen. Welcome to Ask Dr. Doreen, and welcome Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
I am so excited about today's show because, you know, there's been all this information floating around about the DSM-5 and the autism criteria in it, and I hate to speculate. I just, you know, it's kind of a waste of time because you don't know what it's going to be, and we're getting close to the date where it's officially released.
Well, it's released. We just can't get it. Like, I've pre-ordered it for a while now, and it was supposed to come out this month, so we'll see when it arrives.
Okay.
And hopefully this is the last version of what I'm going to review today. It's all been kind of, I think what happened was sometime early on, maybe last year, or a little bit longer even, when the first version sort of came out, there was like that period of time for public comment.
Yes.
And I think there was I don't think anybody expected that level of comment, you know?
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of feedback on it. So, and then I think, because I had reviewed it before that, and then when I reviewed it again, or the last version that they released, I think they made some changes, and I have everything that I think is the last version, so hopefully this is all there is.
I'm excited because I only got to see it in the comment period, and it was very interesting to me. I know there are a lot of people there's a great deal of speculation about what happens once it comes out.
Yeah.
But first we need to look at what it is, I think, before we jump too far.
And it's a little bit confusing for those of us who do diagnosis, because right now, I'm not sure if I should still be, I'm seeing kids all the time. On Thursdays I see new patients, and it's like, I don't know, I just saw some kids last week, and I was thinking, should I use the DSM-4 criteria? Should I use the DSM-5 criteria? You know, fortunately, both of the kids that I saw on Thursday would have fit either one, so it wasn't such a big deal. But I think until I get the actual manual in hand, I'm just going to stay with with Diagnostic Manual 4.
Right. So and I can't even imagine for you guys. I know for parents have been writing in and saying, I don't know whether to take my child this month and get them diagnosed or next month.
Right. I mean, and you know, honestly, Shannon, I think the big deal, I mean, I've always said, and this is one of the things I tell parents, because sometimes I can tell when a family comes to see me, they're very, very, very afraid of that label they might get. So I often tell parents it's not the end of the world. Like, it really isn't that. It's only meaningful. The label is only meaningful in terms of really getting services. Beyond that, and funding, beyond that, it doesn't matter, because the way that we treat autism is really just to treat each symptom.
Absolutely.
And work on the actual symptoms rather than, it's not like the diagnosis makes any difference in terms of the treatment.
Yeah, it's interesting, the two camps, because there are parents who are afraid of the diagnosis because of what they think it's going to mean to their child, and then there's the camp of people who understand that it means funding if you get the diagnosis, so they're afraid they won't get the diagnosis. So we, this horrible two-camp, and everybody's in fear. And fear is not a good place.
Right, no. And I think in general, how scary that first either diagnosis is, or a lot of times I see second opinion diagnoses, people who come to me to just make sure what they were told is correct. And it's rare that I will overturn a diagnosis and say, no, you're not, you're not on the spectrum, your child isn't on the spectrum. But it is a crazy, scary thing, because what's associated with it is all this, what people say, that the kids never really improve, or it'll be lifelong, and all that sort of stuff is very scary. And I will break it down for families. There's such a huge variation of kids that we see. It's often possible for me. The other day I saw a 7-year-old who had not had any intervention and had been diagnosed since 2. And had been it was one of those very, very sad stories, honestly. It really broke my heart. In fact, it just really angered me, because the family the child had been assessed by the regional center, and their assessment had taken a year, so that by the time they finally got their approval, the child received 2 sessions of behavioral intervention, and then he was 3. At which point they handed the child off to school, and the school district placed him in special ed class, and there he is now, and he is in a SDC special day class severe, and he's a very, in my opinion, high-functioning child who absolutely should not have been placed in those settings, and this child would have really benefited from intensive behavioral intervention. And so I'm going to actually start giving him intensive therapy, even though he's 7. And I will talk with you guys, and I'd like to put him on sort of like a program like the A-word. Because I think it'll be a pretty drastic change, and it'll be the first time that a 7-year-old starts. And we'll see how that does. I'm pretty sure he's going to do really well,
That's a very, on the one hand, it's horrifying to me.
Yeah, it was very upsetting.
And I always say, there before the grace of God go I, because, I think the difference between that parent and me was that I just happened to be in a place where I got good information.
Yeah, it's less and less. It used to be more like maybe 10 years ago that I would see kids and they were completely lost in the system. We spent a lot of time in the last decade, or maybe even more than 10 years ago, fighting sort of the system and making sure kids get diagnosed earlier and referred earlier. Obviously, the insurance mandates are unbelievably helpful now in terms of this, because even, there was a long phase where pediatricians would not recognize the symptoms. And I think part of that was because even if they did, they wouldn't know necessarily what to do or where to send the children. Now, we get a lot of requests from pediatricians, and the kids are younger. I think it's because the pediatricians actually now know where to send the child. And so then they'll come for behavioral services or just for a second diagnosis or assessment, and it's much younger, much better. Most of the time, we don't have situations like this. That's why it just really upset me. Because, you should never have a child he was, almost conversational. He had a lot of speech. And to be in a severe SDC placement is just so difficult. Just not right.
Heart-wrenching. Heart-wrenching. Well, I'm so glad that they found you.
Me too. I'm excited.
And I'm excited about the potential for us to document it, because so many of our families write in and say, this is great. I love seeing these younger kids and the fact that that's happening. But what about those of us who came to the party late?
Yeah.
What are the potentials for us? What can be done? How do we?
Yeah. I'll talk to you about that and try to set that up. It'll be a lot of fun.
So we're going to talk about the DSM V, and maybe we should start with just a brief description of how the autism diagnosis, how and when it's changed, and in your opinion, why this is a good change before we delve in.
Actually, I think what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about, and I think a few of the slides that I sent you guys, the beginning is more the DSM IV.
Okay, great.
The current situation, and I'll go through that. And that's pretty much been in place since 94. In 97, we had a training version of the DSM IV, but nothing really changed with the autism diagnosis. So really it's been in place since 94, which is a tremendously long time.
Yes.
And so what we'll do first today is go over briefly kind of what the DSM IV says.
Okay.
And how we are diagnosing kids right now. And then we'll go and look at the DSM V diagnostics, and then we'll look at the differences, and then maybe we have enough time, hopefully we'll talk a little bit about sort of the impact it'll have on society.
Great.
If that's okay.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and you know, like you said, we would love to have people writing in and asking questions at any time. Obviously I won't go all hour with this, so that we have a lot of time for people to ask questions afterwards.
Okay, and we've already started to get some questions coming about about some other things, other topics, and I'm going to remind everybody, we're going to keep, if you have a question for something that isn't about the DSM-5, we'll keep that for next week's show.
Right.
But we're going to try to stay on topic today with about the DSM-5.
Right.
And I will go over the question that just came in during a break with Dr. Granpeesheh, but DSM-5 questions are what we're going to be answering for today.
Great.
Okay.
So I think we can go ahead and get started. So first of all, the name of the disorder has changed, and the name is now Autism Spectrum Disorder. Okay. In the past, it used to be autistic disorder. Up to this point, there were essentially 3 different or 5 different diagnoses that were placed under the spectrum.
Okay.
So actually, the way that it is currently is that the chapter heading was pervasive developmental disorders. Essentially, that means disorders that are, cause delays or problems in more than one area. They're pervasive. And the 3 main ones that we were dealing with were autistic disorder, and then Asperger's disorder, and then pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified.
Right.
And so now with the new DSM, everything has been merged, and it is now called Autism Spectrum Disorder, one name.
Okay.
So what you have on the screen, I think, is basically going through the first portion. You'll see autistic disorder, and with autistic disorder, or what we call autism, there had to be a total of 6 or more symptoms. The symptoms would have had to been evident before the age of 3. And just very quickly, kind of the symptoms were in the areas of social deficit, communication deficits, and what we call stereotypic repetitive behaviors. And I've given a few examples of what would be considered a social deficit. For instance, if the child doesn't have eye contact, or the child doesn't share or show. And that's, in behavioral terminology, that's called tacting. Tacting means, how you see in little kids, and they will just sort of make an art project and then just come to mom or dad and show it. Yeah. And that is, or like if they're in the car, for instance, and they'll see, a fire engine, and they'll be like, fire engine or truck or whatever, and all they're doing is showing it or sharing minds, essentially. And that's a very important feature or symptom, because it's the very first example, or not really the first, but the very most obvious early example of joint attention. So that means the child who shows you something already has the understanding that your mind and that his mind are separate minds. Yeah. And so you don't know what I'm thinking about, but here it is. I kind of want to show this to you, or there it is. I want you to see that. And that's kind of like join your mind with mine. Look at what I'm looking at. And that is the I guess, first most obvious sign of joint attention or perspective taking theory of mind. So that's a very important key feature. So if a child is not doing that, that's a red flag.
Okay.
And then, of course, emotional reciprocity is another key feature of the social deficit. You know, these are children who don't really react if they're hurt, or if they need comfort, or if they see another person hurt, or that sort of thing. Now, in the social deficit area, you do need 2 symptoms. This is the current status. You need to have 2 at least in that area.
You could have more,
you
but
could
in
have
order
more,
to qualify, you have to have at least 2.
At least 2, correct. Okay. In communication deficits, the areas that we look at are language, obviously, and that's the most common. Most of the kids that I see come in because they have a delay in language. And then pretend play is considered a communication, or up to this point, considered a communication deficit. So the child is not really doing any pretend play. And pretend play has to do with using sort of imaginary objects to perform various things. Like an early sign of that would be picking up a toy telephone, let's say.
Right.
Yeah. That's symbolic play.
So a bit of imagination.
Imagination, right, or dressing up, or, you know, all those things are imagination, pretend play. And then, of course, there's, even with kids who have adequate language, or we should say speech, they don't have the ability to converse.
Right.
Okay, so any of those are examples of communication deficits. We need at least one symptom in that area. Okay. And finally, the last section is stereotypic and repetitive behaviors, which we also refer to as self-stimulatory behaviors, or stereotypy, and these could be a different, million different things. I listed a few, sort of having routines that are difficult to break. Things have to be a certain way. Preoccupation, you've seen a lot of kids like preoccupied with one aspect of something. Intense focus on one thing where you can't really break the child off of that. Or motor behaviors that are repetitive, like hand flapping or body rocking. And these have all been classic, over time, classified under one heading, which is the stereotypic repetitive behaviors. These are behaviors that don't have necessarily a function, or people don't understand why the child is doing this other than some intrinsic reason that we don't know. And so if you have 2 in the social deficit area and 1 in communication, 1 in stereotypic repetitive behaviors, that's just 4. Right. And you need a total of 6. Okay. So 2 additional symptoms in one of these 3 areas. And as I said, they all have to have become evident before the age of 3. Right. And if you have 6 symptoms, then you have a diagnosis of autistic disorder. That's the current process. Okay?
And so this is part of the reason why 2 children with autism could look so vastly different.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Because somebody could have 5 from communication and 2 from social and 1 from repetitive, and they qualify for an autism diagnosis, but somebody else could have 2 from the social.
That's right.
8 from the repetitive.
That's right.
And 1 from language, and they still have the same diagnosis.
Absolutely. And also each of the symptoms that a child might have might be slightly deficient or extremely. Right. So in other words, a child might have delays in language, but they're not as severe as another child who has very significant delays. And up to this point, you're not really scoring them on a sort of qualitative measure. It's just, do they have a delay or not? Right. So yeah, that is exactly why there are so many different kids, and they all kind of fit under this thing. And it's actually interesting that you say that, because I think the goal for DSM-IV was to help sort of subdivide the kids, and that's why they had the different diagnoses. They had the autistic disorder, which is the one we went through, and then they had Asperger's and PDD-NOS, which we're going to go through now. Okay, great. So Asperger's, and this is all current stuff, DSM-IV, required that you would have 2 in the area of social deficits, again, like autism, and that you would have 1 in the sort of stereotypical repetitive behavior area and none in the communication deficit area. And so this would separate the intention was that this would separate those kids out who have appropriate language skills or communication skills, but they still have some, delays or deficits in social behavior, and oftentimes they would also have some kind of adherence to routines or those types. And that's what we would classify as Asperger's. I never really liked the Asperger's diagnosis ever. It just didn't really fit the kids.
Right.
And the reason for that is that I think Asperger's children right now, the concept is that they don't have any language delay. And I think that kids with Asperger's do have a delay in social language, sort of pragmatic language, a very advanced abstract language. But, so this was how you diagnosed Asperger's, essentially, is that you weren't really looking at communication, you were looking more at social behavior.
And one of the things I've heard from parents that they felt was unjust about the Asperger diagnosis is that people tended to generalize and say, oh, it's a lesser version of autism. I think a lot of us look at it that way, and yet there's the possibility that there's somebody whose deficits in those areas are so extreme that it's a very, profound form of autism, but it's just different areas.
I wouldn't, if you're diagnosed incorrectly, at any point that you place an individual with Asperger's and an individual with autism or autistic disorder next to each other, the child with autistic disorder is always going to be more severe and profound. But what happens, which was kind of unfair for the families who have children with Asperger's, was that the deficits in Asperger's don't appear until a little bit later. So, for instance, one of the things that we're looking at for 2- and 3-year-old, 4-year-old is mostly communication.
Yeah.
And because these children, Asperger's kids, tend to be very intelligent, they kind of overcompensate for the social delays. The social delays don't become really all that evident until maybe 5, 6. So often the Asperger's kids are diagnosed later.
Yeah.
And also, up till now, there hasn't been good funding for Asperger's, whereas, in the California, for instance, regional center system, you don't get any funding from the regional centers if you have a diagnosis of Asperger's, whereas you do if you have a diagnosis of autism.
Yeah.
So, and so basically it was a difficult situation. My Asperger's kids are the ones that I worry about the most, actually, because of the fact that the assumption is they're higher functioning, they don't get the level of support they should.
Okay, good
So
point.
that's one of the reasons I'm happy about the new changes, and you'll see, because it kind of just folds Asperger's into the whole spectrum.
Okay. And then we're left with PDD-NOS.
PDD-NOS, which stands for Pervasive Developmental Disorder Not Otherwise Specified.
You know what parents say it stands for, though?
No.
They say pediatrician didn't diagnose.
Oh,
but
that's
what
great.
PDD stands for.
That's perfect. I didn't know. I'd never heard that.
And then there's something for the NOS as well, but I think it's not something we can say on TV.
Yeah. I just think it's nonsense. It's like, and we have this in mental disorders. You have it, it's not just with autism, you have it across a few other disorders as well, where it's kind of like the catch-all category.
Yep.
It's like, okay, this is the child who has not 6 symptoms, but 5.
Right.
Okay, where do I put him?
Right.
He definitely has 5 deficits or 4 deficits that have to be dealt with. So we put him in the PDD-NOS category and say, okay, that means he's higher functioning. He's less delayed, or he has fewer symptoms to deal with.
Right.
And that was... The kids with PDD-NOS, I think, were completely treated unfairly, because everyone kind of expected these kids to just do fine.
Right.
I mean, I had over the years, many situations where I had to go to court for kids or really argue the fact that they needed services despite their PDD-NOS diagnosis.
Yeah. Because funding sources frequently go, so you have maybe 5, not the 6,
right.
and or maybe 2 of them aren't from the one area that they need to be from social.
Exactly.
So you could actually have 7, but if they weren't 2 from the social, you don't fit the diagnosis. So there you are with the pediatrician saying to you, oh, your child has deficits, good luck with that, there's no funding.
Exactly.
Horrifying.
For instance, I would have a child where they would have every single stereotypic behavior that could exist, and delays in communication, and because they had just one symptom is the social, which would be just aberrant social behavior, and you'd look at that child and say, oh my gosh, he's more severe.
Right.
And I can't diagnose him. So these were some of the problems that we had.
Hopefully addressed in the DSM V.
Yes, hopefully addressed now. I think they will be, actually. I like it. As I said before, we'll see how it impacts society, but I do like the new criteria.
So we're going to delve into the DSM-5 now. I think we should take a short break.
Okay.
We'll let you take a drink and let you guys ask questions about anything that we've discussed so far, and then we'll continue on with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh breaking down the new DSM-5 autism criteria. Stick with us.
Hi guys, welcome back. For the month of May, I thought it'd be really neat if we made our own bird feeders. What's cool about it is once it's done and it's hung in your front yard, backyard, balcony, or whatever outdoor area you have, your kids will be able to observe the bird feeder and tap when they see birds coming over and feeding from it, like, oh my gosh, oh, so exciting. Do you see that? Sorry, I got distracted. I'm just so excited about all the different birds I've been seeing now that I have a bird feeder hanging outside. Anywho, let's get started. The materials you'll be needing are 2.5 cups of birdseed, half a cup of boiling water, 2 packets of unflavored gelatin, a spatula, twine, scissors, wax paper, and cookie cutters. Alright, now that I got your materials, it's super easy. I have my boiling hot half cup of water, and I'm going to take my 2 packets of unflavored gelatin, and I'm going to pour them in and stir it. The reason I pour it in the water first all by itself is to make sure that the gelatin dilutes really well, and I can stir it up real nicely. Now that it's been all stirred together, I'm going to take this liquid and pour it into the birdseed, making sure to scrape up all the gelatin that we diluted. Now I'm just going to stir it all up. Okay, now that this is all mixed up, I'm going to take my wax paper and put it on my table, just so I don't make a mess. And then I'm going to take my cookie cutter and lay it down. I'm also going to take a piece of string and cut it, about 6 inches long. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill the cookie cutter halfway full with our birdseed mixture. And I'm going to take my string, fold it in half, I'm going to place it in the center. This way you can hang this up once it's done and dry. Now that it's full, I'm just going to pack it in. So now that this is all compacted, it's going to take about 6 hours for the gelatin to get completely hard. If you take it out too soon, the whole thing's going to fall apart. So let's wait a little bit, and I'll see you guys in a few moments. All right, it's been 6 hours now, so let's see if this little guy worked out. So I'm just going to pull him up and pop him out, okay? And here's my finished bird feeder. All you have to do now is hang it outside and wait for all the great things you're gonna see. Like, ooh, I see another bird. This is so exciting. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the activity and keep me up to date with all the different birds that you and your child see outside your property. Until next time, craft on. Bye, guys.
Can you see me? Can you see me flying by your side?
Welcome back to Autism Live and Ask Dr. Doreen. We have with us in the studio right now Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh, truly a visionary in the field of autism, and I would argue the greatest autism expert.
Thank you.
You have the experience and have had you don't look like you could possibly be old enough to have had the experience that you have, but you have.
Yeah,
and working with children and really being at the forefront of getting help, both clinically, but also making sure that the legislation happens that will help the families.
Oh yeah, things have improved quite a bit since I started. But yeah, I think it's been my puzzle my whole life. Like, I've been trying to figure it out my whole life. So the more we know, the better, of course.
Well, and it helps me to sleep at night to know that great minds like yourself are working on this, working on, and you always take into consideration, how do we get this to the family? How do we trickle this down to the family? because they're the important part of this. I always hear you saying that, and I appreciate that greatly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
And so today we're talking about the DSM V.
DSM V.
We just went through the DSM IV and talked about what the current status is, and now you're going to start to tell us what some of the differences are.
Right. So what we'll do is we'll talk first about, because it's quite different.
Okay.
So we're going to start with just like a definition of the DSM V criteria now, and then we'll just sort of target the differences.
Okay.
So first of all, as I said, it's called autism spectrum disorder now, which I'm glad, because for many years people were just referring to ASD, and that wasn't a term that even existed.
Funny.
Even the chapter wasn't called ASD,
right.
and I was like, where are people getting this from? So
yeah, it sort of became the PC term, because there was such the battle between, is the child autistic or does the child have autism?
Right.
And different people feel different ways about it, so everybody started saying ASD.
Right.
Because nobody could argue with that.
Right.
But
right.
so now it flows with it.
Now it flows with it. And so it starts with the first criteria, I guess, which they call criterion A. And this, there's a lot of text on the screen here, but basically this is persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction across contexts, and it can't be accounted for by general developmental delays, and manifested by all three of the following.
Okay.
So there's two things here. One is we're no longer saying you have to have like X number of the following. We're saying you have to have all of the ones that are listed on this page. And the purpose for this is that they've joined communication and social. Now, I've said for years and years, obviously, how can you not have a social delay if you have a communication delay?
Right.
There's almost no way, right? I mean, when you have a communication delay, unless you're hearing impaired, you will have a social delay.
Right.
And that's what happens. I mean, how can you socialize if you can't vocalize or communicate?
Right, makes sense.
So it makes a lot of sense that they've joined it. So the very first thing is they've joined communication and social, and these are the things they want you to have. The deficits in social emotional reciprocity, we had that. That was kind of the empathy portion, which ranges from abnormal social approach and failure of normal back and forth conversations. So that's kind of through reduced sharing of interests, emotions, and affect, and response to total lack of initiation of social interactions. So that basically says the whole array, if you have a mild social deficit or if you have a very significant social deficit, that's number one. You got it. That you have that point. But you also have to have deficits in nonverbal communicative behaviors like used for social interaction. Things like poor integration of verbal and nonverbal communication. This is kind of like, standing very, very close to people and talking to them, not giving eye contact, through gesturing. Abnormalities in eye contact, gestures, understanding gestures, exactly, body language as a whole, or deficits in understanding and the use of nonverbal communication, all the way to a lack of facial expression or gesture. So that means sort of doesn't matter how severe, but if you are not able to have those, if you don't have those nonverbal communicative behaviors, whether they're mild or severe, then you classify. That'll be point 2. You have that.
Okay.
Third area is deficits in developing and maintaining relationships appropriate to developmental level, ranging from all the way from difficulties adjusting behavior to suit the different social contexts, all the way through difficulties in sharing imaginative play, making friends, to an apparent absence of interest in people. So this is, again, is a sort of a broad array. So it's kind of like, oh, I have a hard time making friends, or I just have absolute isolation, no contact at all with people.
Right.
And so for us, as people who've been diagnosing, these are not new words. These are all old words. They were part of the diagnosis before, but they weren't merged.
Okay.
What's happened now is they've merged it, and they've said, so you must have all 3 of these. Okay, so now let's look at what they are. That
Can
means,
I ask one thing,
sure.
though? Because what's initially scary to me as a parent is, you have to have all 3 of these, but within those 3, they give you such a broad target, and you just have to have one thing within that broad target, correct?
That's right.
Okay, great.
And if you really think about it, Shannon, these 3 are the ones that most of the kids would have before anyway, because Remember, we used to have 2 in the social area?
Right. Right.
And at least 1 in the communication area?
Right.
That's what they are.
Okay.
It's those 3 that everybody always had.
Okay.
So most of our kids will fall into one of these categories, or all 3 of them, actually. So just to be clear, the first one is just social emotional reciprocity.
Okay.
The second one is non-verbal communication.
Okay.
And the third one is developing and maintaining relationships. And these 3 are pretty commonly, checked off when you do diagnosis, even with the criteria right now.
So whether you before had a PDD NOS, or you had Asperger, or you had autism, chances are that, you've got a good chance
You're going to have these 3.
Okay, great.
Because you might, for instance, if we look at it, a very mild case right now would have, for instance, back at the first category was, deficits in social emotional reciprocity, right? Let's say this child would have difficulty with back and forth conversation.
Okay.
They get hit number 1.
Right.
Number 2 is, they also have a little bit of a difficulty understanding other people's gestures.
Okay.
Okay, and the third one would be, for instance, they don't make friends like other kids do.
Okay.
See how mild it is?
Yes.
But you would qualify.
You qualify. Okay, great.
And on the very severe end, obviously, completely isolated, no eye contact, so it works. So that's criterion A, and that's the most important that has to be present.
Okay.
Now, criterion B is where they deal with all the stereotypical stuff that used to exist also, remember? And so that's restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities as manifested by at least 2 of the following. So they just want you to have 2 of the 4 that they've listed. Okay. And of the 2 would be, so here are just some of them: stereotyped or repetitive speech, motor movements, use of objects, and we've said this, sort of the kids who have, repetitive speech like echolalia, or they have motor movements like hand flapping or body rocking, all of that. Second one is excessive adherence to routines. Right? That's our kids who have rituals and patterns of, they just want things to be a certain way and they have a hard time. The third one is there too: highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in intensity or focus. Like really always having to kind of look at the detail of their toys, or all of those. And again, as I said, those 3 are very common language for us who've diagnosed, because those were the classifications that were under stereotypy before.
Sure.
That hasn't changed. These are just examples that were there. But they're saying you need to have 2 of these. Now look at the 4th one. The 4th one is awesome. It's brand new. I love it. Thank God they finally got it. Yeah. It's the very, very first time sensory comes into the diagnosis. We've never had sensory before. Hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. For instance, indifference to pain, heat, cold, or adverse response to specific sounds, textures, excessive smelling, touching, fascination. I am so happy that came in. Yes. Because all of my kids had some form of sensory, the majority of my kids had some form of sensory issue, and it just it wasn't classified. Right. So it was always important to treat that, but it wasn't something that would contribute to the child receiving a diagnosis. Now it does. Which is exciting. Because in criterion B, you need 2 of the 4. And so if let's say someone has repetitive speech and sensory issues, they'll qualify. Or if they have very, item 3, which is the highly restricted fixated interests and the excessive adherence, those to me are caused usually by anxiety. And a lot of my kids have anxiety, so they kind of do obsessive compulsive behaviors. Right. So for me, it's awesome, because if I now have a child who has sensory issues and anxiety, which a lot of times the anxiety comes from the sensory dysregulation. Right. It's a pretty scary world if things are like too intrusive or too loud, it makes you anxious. Now I have that. If I have a child who has those 2 symptoms, that qualifies for criterion B. Okay, great. And that's terrific. So not to get confused, but criterion A was where we were looking at the social and communication. Right. Criterion B is where we were looking for the stereotypical repetitive. Okay, but that's got the added sensory component. Which is terrific. Wonderful. Yeah. Now we have 2 more. We have criterion C, which says that the symptoms must be present in early childhood, So in other words, that was the same as before. Remember, we had said they should be there before the age of 3.
Right.
Symptoms should be apparent. And criterion D is that the symptoms together limit and impair everyday functioning. That's not even necessary. I think they put that in there because, I don't know, I mean, it's funny because in the previous years, whenever I train interns and I'm trying to teach them how to diagnose, I've always told people, and I think we've even said it on this show, that nothing is considered a diagnosis or a disorder unless it impairs day-to-day functioning.
Right.
I always give the example of, you know, somebody could go home and drink a bottle of scotch every night, and as long as their family is happy, they're functional, they go to work, they can balance their checkbook, everything's fine, they don't have a disorder.
Right.
You know, so the disorder only comes in when it has to do with limiting the individual's everyday functioning.
Right.
And so, you know, in school, when it comes to kids, or within the family structure, and when it comes to adults, it has to do with work.
Can I go back to C for a second?
Sure.
Emily, can you put that back up for a second? Because when we saw last summer and were able to comment, it seemed as though that this, in parentheses, is the new part of this. Is this, or is this, was this in DSM 4 and I just didn't know it was there?
No, it's a clarification. I think what they're trying to say, but may not become fully manifest until social demands exceed limited capacities. The reason for that is that often a parent who this is their first child won't really know what's appropriate or not appropriate, and therefore we only start to see a lot of the problems when the child enters, let's say, preschool.
Yeah.
And so what this is trying to say in the parentheses is that, you know, the child could have had these various symptoms, but because the parent was just not placing demands or was doing their best to try to just walk around the child and take care of the child, the child didn't really show these deficits, or perhaps the child was, you know, homeschooled or in an environment where it just didn't become evident.
Okay.
So this is something good. In other words, it basically says, okay, well, maybe the first person who saw it was the teacher and the child was now 4, which is very common, but that doesn't mean that the symptoms didn't exist before.
Because that sounds great, because I know at least one mom has asked that she has a 7-year-old that when he was getting diagnosed, they said, well, the symptoms weren't there before 3, but has huge social deficits that have become apparent in the last couple of years.
Right.
So he might qualify just because of that parenthetical. Is that possible?
Well, remember we were just talking about Asperger's, and we said that when the children have Asperger's, there's so much, their functioning level is higher, and so a lot of the things about Asperger's, like let's go look at even these. Now let's forget about Asperger's because Asperger's is gone now.
Right.
But let's talk about, for instance, the social deficits that we just went through, right? Let's say someone doesn't have, has, for instance, difficulty with nonverbal communicative behaviors, or deficits in maintaining relationships.
Right.
Okay, developing and maintaining relationships. That's a great one. That's number 3 under criterion A. That's something that doesn't even develop normally until after 3.
Right.
See, when you are 3 or even after 5. So when you're a 3-year-old, you don't have sustained relationships with peers. Every day someone else is your best friend. Right? We all know that.
Right.
And it has to do with if they brought you candy or gave you their pencil.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That's very normal. So if a child now is really having problems, and let's say they're 5, and their main area is just they can't develop relationships, well, that caveat in the parentheses sort of allows us as diagnosticians to say, okay, well, maybe it wasn't apparent before 3, but it wasn't something that would become apparent.
Right.
So it is now becoming apparent, and the child's 5. That doesn't mean that the earlier deficits weren't there, because there has to be some core cause.
Okay.
The good example of that, Shannon, is theory of mind, is the perspective taking stuff that we know so many of our kids have a problem with, yet perspective taking in normal kids doesn't really even develop until 4 or 5.
Okay.
So how would we say this is a core deficit that must be present before 3? No. an earlier version of it would have had to been present, but it just became apparent after 3.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's what that means.
Okay.
So now we have criterion A, B, C, and D. Okay, and if you remember, all of A, 2 of the symptoms of B, which is the restricted repetitive behaviors, the symptoms have to be there in early childhood, even if you can't see them right away, and they impair the child's everyday functioning.
Okay.
Great. That's it.
Okay.
That's the new diagnostic criteria. And I look at the key differences, and that's on the next slide. And so you notice that the 3 domains now become 2, whereas before it was social and communication and repetitive behaviors. Now it's only social communication and repetitive behaviors. Okay. Second change is that now we don't have categories anymore of autistic disorder, Asperger's, PDD, etc. Now we are just dimensional. It's one-dimensional. It's like far end to, very excessive to not so excessive, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Another new change is that we now require 2 of the repetitive restrictive behaviors. Before 1 was enough.
Right. But there's the addition of the sensory, which is quite amazing and makes that much more palatable.
That's right, and that's an awesome addition. Yes. And the other 2 really good changes that are on the next slides are we have what are called specifiers and modifiers, which I'm going to go through in a sec.
Okay.
And we have level of severity, which I'm going to go through after that. Okay, so the next...
Should we take a break? Would you like to take a break before we do the or you want to forge on?
Completely up to you.
Let's take a short break, and then we're going to come back to do the specifiers and modifiers and severity. So keep your questions coming. Right back more with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh after these messages.
Every child with autism deserves a bright future.
Without further clarification, the Affordable Care Act could actually result in less benefits for individuals with autism spectrum disorders.
We urge Catherine Sebelius to clarify the Affordable Health Care Act.
She can make one change, one little minor change, to make applied behavioral analysis be part of the health care plan.
By signing this petition, you are protecting the health care benefits of individuals with autism spectrum disorders.
We need to make sure
that we are heard
and seen.
Sign a petition at autism-live.com.
Here's how you can show your infinite support. Create your own infinity ribbon. What you're going to do is take a ribbon that's been cut about 8 inches long, and you're going to grab one end and then twist it, and then take the 2 ends and join them together, and then take it together, and then I'm going to flip it around and take another piece of tape, and what I have is double-sided sticky tape. Squeeze down. You have your very own infinity ribbon.
With ABA,
the possibilities are infinite.
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 With ABA,
the possibilities are infinite. With ABA,
the possibilities are infinite.
Welcome back to Autism Live and Ask Dr. Doreen. We have Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh here with us in the studio, and she is taking apart this DSM V, the criteria for autism, and it's very exciting to see this all now and see what has changed. You've gone through the DSM IV so we could see what the status was and some of the differences, and gone through the DSM V, but now you're going to show us the modifiers and the levels.
That's right, and this is sort of a very key portion of the DSM V. Diagnosis. And so just to really quickly summarize with the DSM V, we went through that there are 2 sections now. One is sort of the social communication, and in that you need to have all the symptoms that are listed, although it'll range from pretty severe to moderate to mild. And the second criteria is the repetitive stereotypical behaviors, and in there you have to have 2 of the symptoms. And then if it's before the age of 3 or early development and it causes problems in functioning or adaptive functioning, then you're good so far for the diagnosis. Now there's two other, so at this point you would basically have the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. What's more important is this is how they're helping us differentiate the kids who are so different from each other. Okay. Because you realize we're just kind of, that's why I don't think this is a bad thing, Shannon, because I think what they've done is they've kind of taken away those just random names or labels, put them all in one basket and said, okay, you can be extremely mild or extremely severe as long as you have these things. Now we're going to talk about how to give a better picture of each child. Okay. So with the new criteria, if the child meets the diagnosis of ASD, he's going to receive the diagnosis, and this is the first time ever anybody's even asking etiology. What's causing it? If we know that this is symptoms of autism due to, let's say, a genetic disorder like Rett syndrome or Fragile X, you're going to put it in here now. You're going to say ASD with Rett syndrome, ASD with Fragile X. Now, what's really awesome about this, and it's funny because when you look at the diagnostic, the manual 5 and how the examples they gave, which is Rett syndrome and Fragile X, right? First of all, Rett syndrome, oh my gosh. Rett syndrome used to be one of the ASD, one of the pervasive developmental disorders before, and it is unbelievably rare. I actually don't know the exact prevalence of Rett syndrome, but in my lifetime, and I've been seeing kids for 30 years, more than 30 years, I've maybe diagnosed 3 kids with Rett syndrome, and it's a much more progressive and debilitating genetic disorder. So it's kind of now, but it does at some early stage, it can resemble autism symptoms. And Fragile X, of course, is a pure genetic disorder, and again, at some point early on will resemble the symptoms of autism. And those are the only 2 that they've listed as possible examples, but this is very exciting for me because there's, oh my gosh, so many other genetic disorders that resemble autism, and this is so important, like Angelman syndrome and so on. And I love the fact that we can easily put those children in, because up till now what would happen is if you were diagnosed with a genetic disorder, you were pulled out of autism and all your funding was shut off. Which is horrible. Right, exactly, because it's garbage. Kids who have, let's say, Angelman's or any of these other milder genetic syndromes will benefit tremendously from behavioral intervention, and it wasn't fair that they would be pulled out because someone has discovered their genetic issues.
What a disservice.
So this is very good, and so you can put that in there now. This is very important. And, of course, let me see, do I have it on the other pages? I think I do. Well, and the other very important, if I don't, I should just mention it here. The very cool thing here is this means you can also basically say that the child has other types of medical illnesses. So this is kind of important that you can start throwing these in, right? If you know that it has to be etiology, so it's kind of like pretty clear that this other thing is leading to these symptoms. That gives us a new in. Now the modifiers are kind of interesting as well. The modifiers indicate some other important factor. They're not the cause, but it is an important factor for diagnosticians or treatment providers to be aware of, for instance, with seizures, ASD with seizures, ASD with intellectual disabilities. Now, this is kind of very, very important, that last one, because historically, people had always thought of autism as, so back in, I think it was DSM V, maybe even, people were saying things like, it's if you have a child with autism, they're also mentally retarded. They have mental retardation, and I fought that for years and years and years. Now what they're saying is, if the child has mental retardation, you can put that in. So in other words, they're agreeing with the fact that the vast majority of our kids don't have it. So that's awesome. So that's another thing.
Very awesome.
Yeah. These are modifiers, so those are 2 other things. I have to kind of speed up, don't I? Because I'm almost done, actually.
We'll take as much time as it takes.
Right. So then the other things that go in, again, on the specifiers and modifiers are things like early history. And these are awesome things. Like, you're giving so much more information on the diagnosis now than you ever did. So, for instance, age of perceived onset. Before, you either had autistic disorder, or you had what was called childhood disintegrative disorder, which was for kids who regressed. None of us ever used childhood disintegrative disorder. It was just such a silly, contrast. This allows us to actually talk about the pattern of onset within the diagnosis. So, was there a loss of skills? When did it happen? And so you could be actually diagnosing kids as things like ASD with onset before 20 months and loss of words.
Wow.
Or ASD with onset before 32 months and loss of social skills. That is spectacular. Like, I love defining it this way. Or you could just simply say ASD with no clear onset and no loss. This is a child who just never progressed.
And, am I leaping too far? But to me, it seems like that will help in our ongoing struggle to phenotype autism. If this information is put in at diagnosis, and then we see and track the progress, it's going to help us down the road to be able to know what's effective for each one of those categories.
Right. It's going to be much, much more helpful, for sure, definitely, no question. Yeah.
Love that.
And so if you wanted to hear in this category, in the modifiers or specifiers, you can also say ASD Asperger's type.
Okay.
So in other words, what would have previously been diagnosed as Asperger's, now you can mention it here.
Great.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
So the specifiers and modifiers are terrific. They really
for
are.
Everybody.
Absolutely. They're wonderful. And finally, the last new addition is the level of severity. Now, the level of severity essentially gives you 3 levels, and that's level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 1 means the child requires support. Level 2 means the child requires, or the adult requires substantial support. And level 3 means requires very substantial support. And we've given a few examples within social communication, if someone, and restricted behaviors. So, if you need some support, that means in the area of social communication, without support, there would be some significant deficits in social communication. That's the mildest. But look at level 3, if you require very substantial support, that means really if you look at this individual's social communication, it's pretty much non-existent, very minimal social communication. Or if you look at the restricted behaviors, a mild version might be significant interference in at least one context. In other words, this person is self-stimulating, but only in school. Whereas a level 3 child might have constant self-stimulatory behavior in daily life. So this is where it gives you the ability to differentiate the severity level.
So forgive me for asking what's probably a ridiculous question, but is this kind of mimicking, because we use terms like high functioning and profoundly affected, so instead we're going to say level 1, level 2, and level 3?
Right, it is, and it's because of it absolutely. I mean, the high functioning, low functioning type thing will be kind of determined by these.
Okay.
Because really, the more impacted, the lower functioning a person is considered, then the more support they need, obviously. Right. So that they would be a level 3.
Okay.
And I think this is also very critical because keep in mind we don't have Asperger's and PDD anymore.
Right.
So this is sort of to differentiate those kids perhaps that have a higher, like less deficit would be level 1.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's pretty good. I like the levels of severity.
Okay.
Now, and that's the diagnostic criteria. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, which will also impact some people's lives, which I think is important, is that a new diagnosis that came in now is coming into the DSM is called social communication disorder. That's the next slide. I just put this in because this is a brand new thing I haven't seen before. And social communication disorder it's a rule-out diagnosis for kids. If I want to diagnose a child with ASD now, I just need to make sure that it isn't social communication disorder. And this means this is the individual who has some impairment in pragmatic use of language, so abstract social language. And they have a difficulty in the social use of verbal and nonverbal communication. So in other words, they have a hard time with relationships. And it can't be explained by low IQ or word structure or grammar problems. And the symptoms. So this is that scary new diagnosis where some kids may fall into this who used to be Asperger's.
Right.
And they might fall into this now. And if they do fall into this, this is not a funded disorder. Right? It's not part of the ASD.
Okay, so this is the scary part.
This is the one that we have to be cautious about. For me, it's a very clear difference if a child has social communication problems versus a child who has ASD. And that's just very clear for me. First of all, I don't think that you can look at these social communication stuff when you're looking at really young kids.
Right.
Because a lot of the social communication stuff comes up later in life.
Okay.
So, but this is the one that scares me because, and it really has nothing to do with the ASD diagnosis. It's this new one, which I fear a little bit because, it says academic achievement, when those types of things start hitting our kids and a diagnosis comes in that says this is what your kid has, it's not going to lead directly to behavioral interventions. That's a problem.
Okay, that is a problem.
So really the main clinical implications, I guess, things that we need to think about and see how they roll out are now, and this is, by the way, something else that's kind of new, which is very important. And I said this, I criticized so many other people diagnosing, because often you would see a diagnosis of autism on the first, and then you would also see a diagnosis of ADHD. A lot of parents would tell me, my child was diagnosed with autism and attention deficit, and I'd say, well, the diagnostician messed up. You're not allowed to do that.
Okay.
It was not allowed. You could not diagnose ADHD with autism because autism was considered much more pervasive and severe. And it would be kind of like diagnosing someone with like pneumonia and bronchitis.
Okay.
It wouldn't work. Now you're allowed to. Now they're seeing them as two separate things, and they're saying, okay, you can say ADHD and ASD.
Okay.
So this is a big, big, big new thing.
Okay.
And of course now you realize all those gold standard assessments, the ADOS, all that is gone now. They have to redo everything.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're working on redoing all those new assessments. And I think the main implication, or the biggest thing that we'll have to see how it rolls out, is just really how it will help or hinder services and funding.
The funding.
Yeah.
Which
Those
is
are the
always,
things.
Unfortunately, because it shouldn't be.
Absolutely. And we just have to be very careful.
Yes.
Yeah, we have to be careful. And, there's, even to this day, I don't think there are too many people that really understand autism very well, and so it's very important that people who are diagnosing really understand how to do this correctly.
And is there any sort of training that they will...
Not existing. Well, I mean, you could most likely in a year or so there will be some continuing education courses on diagnostics, but they won't be just autism. You'll go to a 2-hour class and it'll review every change that's in the DSM V.
So I guess one of my huge takeaways with this, and something we say a lot here, when you're going to do an assessment, make sure that it's the top quality assessment. If you're going to invest the time and the money, make sure it's top quality assessment. And I always like to advise that whoever is doing the assessment is not tied to who holds the purse strings.
That's very, very true. That's right. And sometimes we would have here in California, the regional centers would do their own assessments, and then it would go one way or another. There's a conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
I guess I would suggest to parents, if I'm not going to go back and re-diagnose my kids. Like this is something important. Like right now, if you have a child with autism or Asperger's or whatever it is, unless there's some benefit to your child in terms of funding, I would just leave it alone. None of us
grandfathered in, right?
Yeah. Well, what's going to happen is, I assume, with the insurance companies, they're going to change your diagnosis to ASD. Then the next round where you are up for funding again, we're going to have to provide new diagnoses.
Okay.
But it's not like you're going to go, none of us are going to go, I have 2,000 kids. I'm not going to go back and re-diagnose everyone, but I will when their insurance stuff comes up or their funding, if the funding questions. That'll be a few years.
Okay.
If you now get a child, so I would just leave it alone and not get too disturbed about it, because really this is just for your services and funding. If you have a child who right now is going into diagnosis and the clinician provides a diagnosis or doesn't, then I would really probably try to see a specialist or an expert, because really it's, that's important. It's just I only worry about the high level kids who need intervention, who may now fall into that social communication disorder category, and that would be a little upsetting, because those are the kids that really do need help.
Okay.
a lot to digest.
Yes, exactly.
And unfortunately, we didn't leave time for questions, but maybe people will write in and we'll cover questions on this topic
we can
next
absolutely
week.
do that next week. Absolutely. I thank you so much for the time doing
It was
this.
a pleasure.
I feel better, in a better place. I'm more informed than I was when we started, and that's knowledge is power.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope it helps people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Always.
And I will say that we're going to be back to regular questions. You guys wrote in a bunch of questions that were about other stuff. I'll hang on to those for next week. And we're going to take a break and go to the A Word, the wonderful documentary, ongoing documentary being made here at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. We're following Jack Riley, a little boy who was diagnosed with autism at the age of 2. This particular episode this week, you'll see he's had his new baby sister come home from the hospital, and we are seeing some challenging behavior. Take a look at how the therapist deals with it and how the parents deal with it and how quickly they get him back on track so that he sees how fun it is to be a compliant child. Who would have thought? Right? So take a look. This is the A Word. When we come back, we'll be Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy. Nancy's gone, but she's given us a statement for me to read that's absolutely beautiful. Can't wait to read it. Get out the hankies. All right, so stick with us.
I thought you were over this. We did this like 5 months ago. I know, that's you. Hi, look.
Hi, look.
You can say hi.
Hi.
Say, I'm Jack Riley.
I'm Jack Riley. I got, it's showtime.
It's showtime.
Sit down, I can eat.
Look what I have. Do you want to play with your rug?
Get the rug.
Whoa, you want to play?
I to play.
Okay, then you need to get your stickers. Do you want the rug?
What's the rug?
Okay, you need to sit here. No, you need to sit right here. Sit down. Sit right here. You need to sit here, buddy. No. Or else we have to go sit on the chair, bud. Come on. Sit up. Okay. You're gonna sit on the chair then, dude. Ready? Clap your hands. Good. See, that's one sticker. Touch your head. There it is. You have to sit on chair, There you go. Thank you. You got one sticker for that. High fives. Very good. What do you want after the one sticker?
iPhone.
iPhone? Okay. Let's see. Touch your back. Very good. See? You got it. High fives. I'll get it for you, okay? Cool. He's been having a lot of non-compliance lately with the other girls too. So most of our session might be compliance training today. It's basically asking him to do things he already does know, so he's successful. But just to get their focus back, by asking them to do things that they already do know, it kind of shifts their focus back on something else. And then I just bring in what I originally asked was to sit in the chair. And he was able to do it. I don't know if it's just, you know, his baby sister or just, it's just been lately. Okay, my turn. Okay, we're going to get 5 stickers again. What do you want to do?
iPhone.
More iPhone? Okay, sure. Okay, ready? Stand up. Good job. Here's 1 sticker. Clap your hands. Good job. Touch your nose. Where's your nose? Good job. Touch your ears. Nice. 1 more. Sit down. Nice. Very good. Here you go. So I'll do that just a couple times just to get him back in the groove of things. Jack, what are you doing?
Pooping.
You're pooping? Oh, okay. You going potty?
Going to potty.
Are you going poo-poo?
I'll go with a potty. Poo-poo.
You have poo-poo in your diaper?
Pooping your diapers.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, are you pooping? Oh, maybe it is. Are you all done? Okay.
What
poop. Yeah, yeah, and then we're gonna get your dad, okay? Okay, we're gonna go see Daddy. Okay? And go show Daddy to say, Daddy, I pooped. Go find Daddy. She's doing it. No? Yeah. Yay! You said you pooped and you did.
You pooped, huh?
Yay!
That's really good. I'm really proud of you. Look at me. I'm really proud of you.
You're going to be a star. You're going to be a superstar. She was very fussy until right this second. That's Big Brother's girlfriend.
How are they doing together?
He mostly ignores her. Although he did have a little monologue yesterday where out of the blue he said, "Bless you, Lainey Grace." And then he said a few other things about her too.
I love you, Lainey Grace.
I love you, Lainey Grace.
Oh, that's sweet.
And he'll kiss her head and thinks that's funny because, of course, Mommy gives her big reactions to his kisses. She says, "Ooh, I like that kiss." So he likes to do it like 45 times. But most of the time, if you ask him what his sister's name is or anything about his sister, he pretends like he didn't hear you, which is fine. We're not in a hurry.
Jealousy to work out on, I think.
And we are very careful if he wants me to, whoever's got her, if he tries to get our attention or whatever. If we can, we give it to him. There's going to be plenty of times where we can't. So we're trying not to have her be the reason we have to say no. For now.
Success. It's been an eventful 1 hour since we've been here.
Exciting.
I know.
Jam-packed. This is going to be an exciting episode added. There's baby, there's pooping, there's tantruming, there's everything.
Only the first hour, Suzanne. Let's see what the second hour will bring us.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy. It's just me. It's just Shannon this time because Nancy is away. And Nancy, bless her, has more energy than any 5 people I know. And she was getting ready to take her son on a school trip. And those of us who know what that's like when you're prepping and preparing, you feel like you have to get everything done for everyone. And so Nancy wasn't going to be here. And she did so much preparation before she left for this show that it was amazing. And including, she wrote a beautiful letter to me last night that I asked if we could read here on the show. So you ready for this? Hi, Shannon. By the time you read this on the air, I will be on my way to the mountains of California for 3 days of outdoor school as a parent chaperone for my son Wyatt and his class of 5th graders. Of course, I had to volunteer to chaperone. If my child with autism wanted to be a part of this experience, as his regular school aide is not authorized to go to an overnight. And because I can't sleep in a boy's cabin, my 68-year-old husband will be going too. That would be the same 60-year-old husband who went through chemotherapy and many other invasive cancer treatments this last year. I have asked him 100 times, "Are you sure you're up for this?" His response, a week, "Yes, of course." So basically, I'm as worried about him as I am about Wyatt getting through this outdoor adventure. As most of you who are parents of kids who have autism know, this kind of undertaking requires a lot of work before you take one step out the door. I used to envy the moms of typical kids, you know, the ones who can throw a few clothes in an overnight bag while we prepare truckloads of special food in a cooler, spend hours putting together supplements for each day spent away, make sure we pack the comforting items that are a part of our routine that our child might need to function. Mr. Pillow is on his last legs, a mere shadow of his former self, which was a full-size Thomas pillow, now patchworked together with one little blue strip remaining. So this could be his last out-of-town adventure. Then there is the anxiety for what may happen. Will he behave? Will he have a meltdown? Will he be able to go to sleep in the cabin? Will he sleep through the night? Will my husband do any or all of the above as well? But recently, despite all the preparation and worry, I've begun to look at things with a different perspective. Count on Nancy to do that for us, right? Maybe all the time and effort we autism moms put into preparing these things make those experiences a little bit more memorable. Maybe we have more of an appreciation for those things that other moms and dads take for granted. Perhaps perhaps the fact that we can't just breeze through childhood is actually a good thing. See, I'm welling up. Makes it hard to read. Maybe I will cherish the small victories, to be able to sit around the campfire and see Wyatt actually listening to stories, to go for a hike in the crisp mountain air with him by my side. And those little victories will be lasting memories, sort of blessings in disguise. That's how I'm going to approach these 3 days away anyway. Yep, that's my plan, and I'm sticking to it. And Shannon, if you or your viewers hear of a dazed and confused middle-aged woman lost in the wilderness of California searching for the nearest Starbucks, make sure you tell them it's me. I'll see you next week with some fun stories and hopefully a few lasting memories as well. I love you, Nancy. And I said to her, Nancy, my goodness, what a beautiful, beautiful letter. I can't wait to read her book. She's working on a book, and we can all wait with bated breath because she's a beautiful, beautiful writer. An amazing woman who is able to look at things, see what they are, then take a step back and make sure that she finds the blessings in things. And let's face it, that's a really important skill, right? So thank you, Nancy, for that beautiful letter and for a whole bunch of prep. There were so many stories. We have so much to talk about this morning, not the least of which in just a little while, we're going to be joined via Skype by Claire LeZebnik. And Claire is one of the co-authors of this book. This is actually my personal book. It was one of the first 2 books that were handed to me about autism, and a wonderful autism mom and dad that my family met that changed our trajectory. I said during the last segment there, but for the grace of God, go I and these 2 parents, because they handed me this book, Overcoming Autism, that is by Lynn Cagle and Claire LeZebnik, who's going to be with us in just a little while. And they also handed me Christina Adams' A Real Boy. And these 2 things together were what made the difference for me, because I was lost in the sea of Google trying to figure out what it was exactly that I was supposed to do, and these 2 things together were really helpful to me. And so it was very interesting because we were having guests on the show a couple of weeks ago for a play called On the Spectrum, and the playwright, whose last name was also LeZebnik, was talking about his nephew who had autism, and he said, oh, my sister-in-law wrote a book you may be familiar with. And I went, what, are you kidding me? No, this book is one of the few books that I really recommend and is on my shelf. So this is actually my copy of that. So we're going to be talking with Claire about this book and about what she's up to now, what her son is up to, and that's going to be in a few minutes. But first, and we have a lot of news stories to cover, so we're not going to cover all of them in the first segment, but we've been talking a lot about the California legislation here on Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy, and we promised you that we would give you regular updates on what was happening with all of those bills. And I know some of you had written in and said, I don't really get why this is important to all of us if it's only happened in California, but we remind you on a regular basis, as California goes, so goes the rest of the country, and then goes the rest of the world. When we set a standard and we show how much improvement happens as a result of it, it makes a difference. We can look to Arizona. Arizona was the first state that really was able to first pass legislation that showed that we absolutely had to fund autism treatment, and then showed the effect of it, which really made things tumble quickly, and a lot more states jumped on as well. So, update for you on SB 126. This was the autism insurance mandate bill for the state of California, because it went into law in July and they wanted to have it continue on. And on May 1st, the Senate Health Committee unanimously approved 9-0 Senator Steinberg's legislation, SB 126, which extends California's landmark autism insurance coverage. The original bill was SB 946 until July 1st of 2019. SB 946 is estimated to provide behavioral therapy for over 12,500 individuals who are overcoming autism, with taxpayer savings of up to $200 million annually. SB 126 is now referred to the state State Appropriations Committee. Your support of this measure is absolutely essential. It is sponsored by Autism Speaks, the Alliance for California Autism Organizations, and the ARCA, and it is greatly appreciated. You can go to autismvotes.org and click on the California state to figure out. It's very easy. They give you form letters to help you to be able to, you can customize it, but they give you a form. I always love working around a form and customizing it because it makes it that much easier to give your support to that. But the Health Committee unanimously pushed it forward. Awesome. New legislation that we want to add to the pile that we've been talking about with California, this idea of a California bullying hotline was pitched at the state capitol, and an amazing mom stepped forward, truly, truly amazing. Lisa Ford Berry, her son Michael Berry, had been the victim of bullying and had shot himself years ago in a school bathroom. And she stood on the steps of the state capitol last Wednesday next to an amazing lawmaker, Senator Lou Correa, and she said, I kept waiting for someone to do, this is a direct quote, I kept waiting for someone to do something. Kids are dying. My son is dead, and no one cared. So they, SB 231, which was passed last week by the Senate Education Committee, would create a 24-hour hotline dedicated to bullying and staffed by psychologists. So the senator and the mom, they were on the steps. They were flanked by children, parents, and teachers at a morning news conference at the Capitol, where Correa said he hopes a hotline would be used by children and teens that may be too afraid to tell their parents about bullying or too embarrassed to tell their teachers. And really important, the psychologists who staff the hotline would not just provide immediate counseling, but would also inform a child's parents and school about the bullying as well. So there is sort of that loop. They're not just going to take the information and not do anything about it. And so the mom was quoted as saying that she really hopes that the hotline will save lives. It's now going to the Senate Appropriations Committee, and that is called SB 231 if you want to provide support for that. Some other stories that we have, I'm just checking the time. Oh, we're incredibly late. You know, we're going to hold these for later because we want to get Claire LeZebnik on the phone, and we'll do some of the news stories a little bit later on. But we're going to take a break, and when we come back, Skype willing, we will have Claire LeZebnik, one of the co-authors of this amazing book that came out in 2004. But it's still, I went through it last night. I was like, wow, this is still an amazing book and still incredibly relevant. Overcoming Autism. Claire LeZebnik right after this. Stick with us.
You say hi, we say hi. Let's get wild, let's get wild. Let's get wild. Let's get wild. Let's get wild. Let's get wild.
Welcome back to Autism Live. I'm Lisa Ackerman with Taka. My guest here.
I am Jennifer Lucero with Taka.
Taka Mom's here in the house. Jeff saw on a TV commercial, they were making calzones, and he looked at me and goes, Mom, please make me that. Wait a minute, yeah, calzone, you can't have calzone. He goes, well, you make me pizza. Why don't we call it a pizzone? So we're going to do this ode to Jeff, pizzone. So I'm going to have Jen come on in.
All right.
You're in charge.
Ready.
We're going to add a little grapeseed oil, garlic, cut up chicken, finely cut up onion, and we're going to throw a little bit of basil. So we're going to just take about 5 minutes or so, saute up the chicken and all of the onions together. While Jen is slaving away at the stove, I'm going to make the pizza crust. A lot of gluten-free choices that you have out there for pizza crust. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the dry. Again, I'm using eggs. There are a lot of egg replacers on the Taka website. We have about a dozen different ways to replace eggs. So I'm going to go ahead and add my shortening. Calls for a little extra salt, which I'm going to put in here. And also add a little pepper. And we also have herbes de Provence that gives the crust a nice Italian flavor. Can't forget the apple cider vinegar, organic stuff ready to go. Yes, I have all my ingredients. We're ready to rock with this mixer. And don't be afraid of dough. Dough doesn't bite. So here's what we'll be working with to make the puzzone. I'm ready to go. Let's get this party started. So what we're going to do next is roll out the dough. I like to be rolling in the dough, but we're going to roll out the dough instead. So let's go ahead and get started here with that. So again, you see me using the parchment paper all the time. Love this stuff. It's basically unbleached, ready to go. It's just going to make life a lot easier on your rolling pin. You don't need to coat it or anything, which is a lot easier. But I swear I should buy that by the gross ton. So the puzzones, this basically makes 2 big puzzones. I'm going to take half of the dough and roll it out. Half of the other dough will be for the other puzzone that we're going to make in just a little bit. So you want to do, you're not making a pie crust. You're kind of making a long oval shape. So we're going to try to make a shape where I'm going to basically roll this over with all the yummy fillings. And so any combination or variation thereof. This sauce, just real simple, is organic crushed tomatoes. I've added a little bit of salt and pepper and herbes de Provence in that as well, which I love. I like extra fresh basil. That's always yummy to have on your puzzone. And thank you. This turned out fantastic. So we're just basically building it the way that we want to eat it. Of course, my favorite rice-free, organic, dairy-free, soy-free cheese. It's going to pop out the sides.
Okay.
I'm not afraid of popping out the sides. So that's the beauty of the parchment paper. Once you're done, you just flip it over and peel it back. So I'm just taking a fork now and going around the edges. It looks so pretty.
It looks really nice.
So for 400 degrees, we're going to go for about 25 minutes. You want it golden brown. And because we cooked everything pretty much already, you're not worried about not having everything fully cooked. So look how cute those look.
Looks great.
Like those 4 happy people right there. This weighs a ton. So let's go to the magic oven. Pull out our finished product. And voila!
Good.
Oh my gosh,
looks
this
beautiful.
is so yummy. There's nothing better than a little Jeff Ackerman puzzone.
Yeah.
And this is going to be nuclear hot, but we'll go ahead and cut it open so you can. Oh my gosh, this is going to taste so good later on for your kids.
Yum.
Feedback, keep it coming. Thank you for helping, Jen.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us. Come back to Autism Live. We'll keep doing allergy-friendly cooking classes. If you have any suggestions or things that you would like to see us make, bring it on. You can reach us at autismlive@gmail.com or Facebook.
Love the Facebook.
I know, too much for me. Facebook, so facebook.com/autismlive. Or thousands of taco recipes ready to go. Basically go to Takanow, TACANOW.org. And we'll see you next time.
You say howdy, we say hi. Let's get rowdy, let's get wild. Let's get wild.
Welcome back, and I am Shannon without a Nancy this morning because Nancy is away on a trip with her son. We just read a beautiful letter from her, but we're so thrilled that this morning via Skype we have joining us Claire LeZebnik. Claire is one of the co-authors of this wonderful book, Overcoming Autism. Claire, are you there?
I'm here.
Wonderful. So thrilled to have you here on the show. And we mentioned that it was a kismet moment that we had your brother-in-law, Ken LeZebnik, on the show because he is a playwright and he wrote the wonderful play On the Spectrum. We had him here with us and we were talking about what inspired him to write about autism because he's written 3 plays about it. And he said, oh, you know, I have a nephew, and by the way, my sister-in-law co-authored a pretty important autism book. And Nancy and I said, which book would that be? And I don't know why the name didn't trigger in my head, but it didn't. But I was so thrilled. I said, that's one of the first books that I was ever given about autism. I love that book. So thrilled to have you here today. And you'll have to give our love to Ken because his play really very amazing.
Isn't that great?
But what a couple of writers you guys have in your family, although you're related via marriage. Are there more writers in the family?
Lots and lots of them, yeah. My husband is a TV writer for The Simpsons.
There we go.
Which is terrific for his kids. It's, it's sort of instant cool. They use it as much as they can. And
is there some sort of Simpsons connection? Because we have Monica Holloway on the show often, and her husband Michael Price, and they have a son on the spectrum. I did not realize that you all knew each other, but you must.
Oh, yeah, I love Monica. She's wonderful. And actually, her son goes to the same school that my daughter does, and they look out for each other there. They're a wonderful family.
It's a very small world. I did not realize. That's too funny. Well, we should talk about this amazing book, because this truly is an amazing book. It came out in 2004. Is that correct?
Yes, and actually, Dr. Cagle and I are currently and deep into the throes of revising it and updating it. We're going to have an updated, revised, new edition next April, in time for Autism Month next April. So Autism Awareness Month. Yeah.
Because
excited.
I have to say, I mean, this was given to me, and this and another book, total game changers for me. And as I was going back through it last night and re-looking at things with new knowledge, and I was saying, man, this really holds up quite well for having been from 2004. I would still recommend this to people. And, there might have been one thing in the appendix that I thought, okay, this could use some big updating, but minorly, really, compared to the information that's in the book. So I'm thrilled that you're doing the updated version of it, but I gotta say, it really holds up well many years later.
It does, and actually one of the first things we say in the book, we wrote a foreword, and one of the first things we say is we didn't need to update it because the behavioral interventions in the book are absolutely, not only are they, do they work as well today as they did 10 years ago, but research over the last decade has proven it, that this is the right thing to do. Mostly what we're doing is adding. There have been a few more studies that the Kagels have done, out of their clinic that just sort of refines and gets more specific about some various information in the book. And then there are little things, as you said, like Dr. Cagle talks a lot about, videotaping your kid and using those tapes, and, who uses videotape anymore? So,
right.
They're just little tiny things like that we're catching. And as the mom in the book, I can talk a little more just sort of long term. I was just saying to her, we were working on the chapter on self-stimulation, and I can say at the end, honestly, I have not thought about self-stimulatory behaviors, in so long that I can't even remember when I last did, that it's not even an issue in our lives anymore.
That's amazing.
And how much I wish, I'd had someone with a son in his 20s who could have said that to me back when my son was always doing hand puppets, all day long. So there's also that sort of added bit of information of what the last 10 years have brought for us.
Great. And I'm going to come back to the hand puppets, because I actually dog-eared one of those pages, because we had a question come in about hand puppets the other day, so I want to make sure we do talk about that. But just a little bit of background for people who aren't familiar with the book. Your subtitle here, Finding the Answers, Strategies, and Hope That Can Transform a Child's Life. And then a further subtitle, A State-of-the-Art Approach of Reducing the Symptoms of Autism Spectrum Disorders. Wonderful titles for the book. So, and you've got Lynn Cagle, Dr. Lynn Cagle, co-writing this with you. I love the approach of this, because you have the science person, the clinician who's there, giving information about something, and then we got the mom's perspective on it, your perspective on it throughout the book. Really was such a soothing thing to me after my son had been diagnosed, to be able to get both of those sides of it.
Yes. That was our goal right away. Dr. Cagle asked me, our son was seeing her. She was his therapist, and we don't live in Santa Barbara, so we didn't get to see her as often as I would have liked. But whenever we could, we'd come down and go up, actually, and find a few more things to focus on and bring back the information to the people we worked with here. she found out I was a writer and had asked if I could work on a brochure for their clinic, and I did, and she liked the way that came out. And then one night she just called me and said, "Would you like to write a book together?" And I jumped around the room for a long time. I'm a fiction writer and never even thought about writing nonfiction, but in this case, this wasn't something I was going to say no to. Right. But it was very early on. We fooled around for a while with how we wanted to do this, and we decided very early on that if we had, her really just practical, great, terrific, researched methods as, the bulk of the book, but then my coming in and sort of saying, how they worked for us, the ways in which I felt maybe I wasn't implementing them as well as I should because life gets in the way, what I saw changing in my son, and just sort of the whole, it is a little hard, I think sometimes you need to hear both sides. It's worth doing the work, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a piece of cake. And experts are so good about telling us what to do, but they don't always sort of get what the experience is like of doing it. And we did have both those perspectives. I think it is, as you said, I think there's something sort of soothing about knowing that it's real. It's not just someone telling you, "Oh, this is what you should do." It's someone saying, these are the ways in which we've tried to do it, and what's really worked for us.
And you start at the very beginning. You go from even before you're getting the diagnosis, and you address that there's an emotional component for the parents as you're going through that process, and as you're starting to begin intensive treatment, that there's an emotional component to it. And I think a lot of books leave that out.
Right.
And I love that you didn't. Because I love it when somebody says you're not wrong for feeling what you're feeling. And I can remember reading and going, okay, I'm not wrong. I'm having emotions and I'm not wrong. Thank God. Truly amazing book. And just for people to go through, I'm just going to read down through some of the chapter titles here, because Diagnosis, Surviving the Worst News You'll Ever Get. Chapter 2, Ending the Long Silence, Teaching Your Child to Communicate. Chapter 3, Tears, Meltdowns, Aggression, and Self-Injury, Breaking the Cycle. Chapter 4, Self-Stimulation, Flapping, Banging, Twirling, and Other Repetitive Behaviors. Chapter 5, Social Skills. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And I love that one of the last chapters is Family Life, Fighting Your Way Back to Normalcy, with some very cool tips about how you make that work. It's a really comprehensive book, and as I said, stands the test of time. And I think you're absolutely right. There's more research to show how effective these different strategies are. So congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very, very proud of that book.
You should be. You absolutely should be. And I mentioned, you actually mentioned the hand puppets. Your son, Andrew, did hand puppets. And we had a question come in about hand puppets. And I dog-eared the page here because somebody was saying the other day that this is something that their child does and that it's of great interest to them. And what I love here is that you describe what your child was doing about the hand puppets, and then here is the next little segment that says how not to get rid of the hand puppets. And it details all of the things that you did that you thought were going to work that didn't work. That was truly brilliant because and then you have the doctor's advice and eventually working on it in a way that was substantive. But I thought it was great that you included here's what not to do. Absolutely loved that. And that's not the only place in the book. But, we should take a short break, and then we'll come back and talk with you some more, because I want to find the next page that I want to talk about. So stick with us. We've got Claire LeZebnik, co-author of Overcoming Autism. We'll be right back.
My name is Rocky.
Autism used to affect 1 in every 10,000 children. Now it affects 1 in every 91 kids.
TACA is one of 5 organizations helping families living with autism today.
Our kids came back to life. There's a whole community out there, and now we're a part of it.
Oh, TACA has a place for me.
To find TACA, go to www.tacanow.org.
Please.
Welcome back to Autism Live, and actually Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy. It's just Shannon today. Nancy is away on a school trip with her son, and we're so glad that she had the opportunity to do that. But I'm here in the studio, and we have with us live on via Skype, Claire LeZebnik, co-author of Overcoming Autism. And this is an amazing book. I've said this is one of the first two books that I got on autism, and it really was a game changer. I was about to have a coughing fit, so we went very abruptly to a break. But we've been talking about the hand puppets. And for those of you who go and get this book, and I want to encourage you to go get it, on page 127, Claire talks about her son and a stim that he would do with hand puppets, and then goes into detail about all the things that she tried that didn't work before getting the doctor's advice. And you mentioned that this is not a part of your life anymore.
Not at all. You know, it's such a wonderful thing sometimes. We all get so caught up in the daily problems and the things we're still fretting about that I think it's really important sometimes to stop and think about the things that we don't worry about anymore, that just aren't an issue anymore. And that's just one of them. I mean, it's almost hard to remember. In fact, I mentioned we're revising Overcoming Autism right now, and I'm reading stories about my own son that I've forgotten because it feels so long ago. Yeah. And not that I've forgotten hand puppets. They were too big a part of our lives, and there was enough anxiety about them back then for it to have stayed with me for a long time. But yeah, I mean, it's just he doesn't. You know, it's just not something that he does. It's just gone. It's gone, and without our having to really pinpoint it or fret about it all that much. Ultimately, I mean, once Dr. Cagle said to us, this isn't something to really worry about. You know, teach him when it's appropriate, when it isn't appropriate. You know, and you know, try to keep him from doing it if it interferes with things like socializing and learning. But in general, we didn't actually have to target it as we got to get this out of our lives. You know, it really was never like that. And steering it towards something positive, you know, is the best thing of all. He liked to do something with his hands. Eventually, he started drawing. And drawing really seemed to provide a lot of the same feedback that he was getting from talking to his hands. And he's a really great artist. He's a graphic design major in college now.
Wow.
So it really, you know, that was a good way to have channeled it, is all I can say.
Really wonderful. And I love what it says in the book about, and what the doctor says in the book about it, because as you said, you know, we want to pick and choose what we target and when we target. And even we've had Temple Grandin on the show, and she's talked about how beneficial it was for her that her mother put limits on. She didn't try to take away her stims, put limits on it and said, yes, you can go spin that plate for an hour a day, but that's it. And instead of getting into that push me, pull you battle about something that really isn't as important as teaching skills that they can use the rest of their life, or decreasing skills that are preventing them from access to things in their life. So
exactly.
Great advice. I also want to, because a lot of people are still in IEPs, as hard as it is to believe. I've got an IEP coming up. You have a great chapter on education in here. And it's a little more dog-eared than the rest of my book, because I referred back to it many times about how to choose a teacher. And I think it's particularly not only for people who are doing IEPs right now, but a lot of people are doing the open house time of year where you're going to go to your school. And we have always now spent a few minutes in our child's classroom and then shopped other classrooms using your criteria.
Oh, good.
Because you have this great list of things about what to look for in a teacher to know whether your child is going to succeed in the classroom. And you're rewriting your book now, so I don't know how familiar you are with the things that are in your book if you've got somebody who's 20 years old, but does the teacher have good behavioral control of her students? Is the teacher able to individualize the instruction for the variety of different student abilities in her classroom? Is the teacher willing and enthusiastic about having your child in their class? I love that one. And then 2 more pages of them. And talking about inclusion. We've had a lot of people asking questions about inclusion. Your chapter here on education and classroom, I'm going to use the word brilliant. and I mean it.
That's great. I'm happy to hear that.
And not only that, in the back, it's a little bit different than what I use, but you've got a great behavior data sheet.
Right.
And a great toilet training data sheet. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
Really, really love this. So as you're looking at the changes that you're making, you said you're not having to do much to the guts of the book.
Right. It's almost entirely adding. We're adding. For instance, I happened to just, right before we started this interview, I was working on the school chapter, and Dr. Cagle and I are adding a couple of more criteria for the teacher selection.
Awesome.
She added one really great one is, is the teacher willing to be a team player? Is she or he willing to be part of your team? And I was very lucky. I had an aide, a one-on-one aide, who was willing to come to our house and meet with Dr. Cagle and the other people we were working with at the time, and we would coordinate things all across, the different environments. So if there was something we needed to really work on, everybody would be working on it wherever, my son was. And it's just so important to find someone who's receptive, who, if you say, what, when he does that behavior, don't take him out of the classroom, even if that's what you would normally do, because he finds that reinforcing. Instead, please ignore that and try to get his attention doing this. You want someone who'll say, okay, I'll try that. I'm happy to try whatever you want me to try. And not someone who says, I've been doing this for years. Don't tell me how to do my job.
Yes, absolutely. The people I love it when you sarcastically, when you run into an educator who thinks they've learned everything.
Yeah.
Because then you know that it's not somebody who really is all that interested in learning. So I want to take a minute now to talk about, because you refer to Andrew so many different times in the book, and there's a very moving section in the back where the doctor talks about her experience of Andrew at the point in which you finished the book, and talking about meeting another professional, and the professional asking, had she cured any children, and the discussion that ensued about the term cure, not necessarily a correct term, but are there children who get to the point where they're virtually indistinguishable from their peers? Absolutely. And that she was also at a reception where someone who knew your family did not know that you had a son on the spectrum. And in fact, when the person was told, yes, that you have a son on the spectrum, they guessed wrong which one. Is that correct? Did that really happen?
Yes, that was a true story, and very gratifying at that stage of our lives. Yeah. Yeah.
And so my big question for you is, tell us a little bit more, because we love, as an autism mom, I love to hear stories about what his life is like now, and what your life is like now. How much autism plays a role in your life?
Well, that's it. I've got to be careful about, because he's an adult now,
yes,
and has his own life. I try to be a little more circumspect than I was back when he was.
I appreciate
6.
that.
But I can tell you that it's very funny, because as I've been rewriting the book, and it's happened that currently this came up with you, that we would do this interview, and I saw my brother-in-law's play, which is about autism, and I had worked with him a little on that. Just read it for him, and I just recently, a couple different people, I get emails and phone calls from people referred by friends or off of the book with more questions as follow-up to the book, and I always try to answer. I consider that the community service I do in life is responding to people who want to know more. And so for some reason, after years of really not having autism be much of my life at all, it's all come back in the last few months, and I'm sort of steeped in it again, and it made me realize that as far as our daily life goes, it really hadn't been. I'd say, Andrew has been in college now. He just finished his junior year, and he goes to college 2,500 miles away from home. He goes to college in Vermont. And he's not great about calling, which is disappointing, but also means that I can go, there are days where it's just, it's amazing to think that there was this time in my life when every day was about, which therapies I would take him to, and what my interactions would be like with him, and was I keeping him engaged enough, and was I Was I being a good mom for him and helping him grow and learn? And now, it's just not part of my life in the same way. It's more, as I said, it's more about the book now and about consulting with other people. Yeah. Which isn't to say there are no problems in our personal lives because of it, that we're free of some of the challenges that it brings with it. We're not. And things do come up. And we try to find the most productive ways of supporting and helping. As I said, we tend to be far away a lot of the year, which makes it more challenging. During the summer, other things happen. And we're just so lucky that we have Dr. Cagle in our lives, because she's there for us to call on and help us. And she and her clinic have been doing amazing work with young adults on the spectrum and older adults, everywhere from college students to middle-aged people. They've been working a lot with that older range. It's very different issues that come up at that point. And they've really worked out some wonderful interventions for supporting, most of it's social in those ages, and they're doing amazing things.
And we should say the name of her clinic. It's in Santa Barbara.
Yes, it's the Cagle Autism Center at the University of California, Santa Barbara. It was renamed fairly recently, so it is named after Len Cagle and her husband, Robert, who work together and run the clinic together.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so thrilled for you, and I'm so thrilled for your family. I definitely hear you that it's not a perfect existence. I think we've all let go of the idea that there is anything called normal, and there is anything called perfect. Monica Holloway's new book is called There Goes Perfect, which I think is fabulous. And love to have realized that we have mutual friends in her. And I hope when the new book comes out that both you and Dr. Cagle will come and be on the show to talk with us and to promote the new version of the book. But in the meantime, I got to tell people, great book. You need to have it. And if you've got a friend who has recently had a child been diagnosed, this stands the test of time. Great book to put in somebody's hands as a gift to say, welcome to the club you never thought you were going to belong to, but now that you're here you go. Here's a great thing to have. So I thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, Claire.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
And again, we'll see you back, you said in April of next year.
Yes.
Fabulous. We'll look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
We're going to take a short break and kind of continue on with some of the stories that we've got going and a couple of events that we want you guys to know about. So stick with us right back after these messages. Currently in the United States, 1 in 88 children is affected by autism. 1 in 88 means something different when your child is the one. Recovery is possible. Hi, I'm Shannon Penrod, host of Autism Live, an online show about autism broadcast by CARD, the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. I'm also the mother of a child with autism, my beautiful son, Jem. You know our old joke, guess what?
Chicken butt.
Chicken butt. So we're going to take the chickens. But things weren't always so easy. I remember when Jem was first diagnosed with autism. I used to lay awake at night in bed and pray for someone or something that could help us to get our child back. My prayers were answered by Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh and the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. CARD treats autism and other related disorders using the principles of ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis, which is the only scientifically proven effective treatment for autism. It is also recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics and the U.S. Surgeon General. About a year after we started treatment with CARD, we were able to see tremendous improvement, and we got our child back.
What grade are you in?
Second.
You are a smart cookie, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Do you like school?
Yeah.
Do you have any good friends?
Yeah, Oscar.
Oscar is your best friend?
Yeah.
And my child is just one of thousands to benefit from CARD ABA therapy. Across the nation and around the world, children are making amazing progress and being given the keys to unlock their full potential.
We are extremely grateful for the amazing job CARD has done in helping our daughter. Our daughter today, just in 4 months, I think is a totally different child than when she started with CARD. I kind of see it as, it seems like her brain in a way was asleep, and now that we've gotten so many services, we've seen her wake up.
It just has some gases.
Recovery is possible if you take the right steps, if you're willing to put in all the hard work. And 7.5 years, yeah, it's a lot of work. It's worth every little bit, and CARD's been there with us every step of the way.
I have 2 children with autism. I can't imagine a day without CARD or the therapists. They've been so instrumental in helping us with our kids and shaping their lives and helping us help them.
Thank you, Christina Big Alex.
Thank you, Jackie and Mariana.
We've tried other things before ABA, but the most beneficial thing has been ABA services, and I'd be the first person to tell any newly diagnosed family that you have to contact an ABA provider, and if you're lucky enough to have CARD, you're very blessed.
Recovery from autism is absolutely a possibility. We've been recovering children for over 20 years. It's just a matter of identifying the child's medical needs, understanding the child's sensory issues, and then teaching the child all of the skills they need in order to function normally.
We know there's hope for autism. Autism is treatable, and recovery from autism is possible. Welcome back to Let's Talk Autism with Shannon and Nancy. This week it's just with Shannon. We wish Nancy well as she's hiking through the mountains of California with her son and her husband. A couple of stories that I want to make sure that we fit in as we're getting close to being out of time. There is a young man, his name is Wesley Lawrence, and he is 16 years old on the autism spectrum, and he has recently started having seizures that have progressed in severity. And he hasn't been able to leave his home for 3 months because it seems to happen when he leaves home, there's something that's triggering it, so that upon returning home, the seizures are happening and the severity of them is increasing. And so this month, he is scheduled to have 2 brain surgeries that are quite risky as a result. And there's the possibility, we're all going to keep a good thought, but there is the possibility that he will be able to lose his ability to speak and walk. And his mother and dad have been talking about this and saying that, while it's very scary and they're very concerned, that he has said that he wants to be able to leave the home and to lead a life. And so they are going to forge ahead. But one of the things that he has asked for is that people send him letters. That's what he has asked for. Now, how lovely is that a 16-year-old on the spectrum has said, here's how you can support me. So I think we should honor that. His name is Wesley, and it's spelled Weslee Lawrence, Lawrence. And the address that you can send it to is 44011 Morning Star Court. That's 44011 Morning Star Court, and that is Elizabeth, Colorado. The zip is 80107. So again, it's Wesley, spelled Weslee Lawrence, Lawrence. The address is 44011 Morning Star Court, Elizabeth, Colorado, 80107. And I understand that the family is also taking donations. So there you have it. There's a young man who would like some mail, and I hope you guys will help out with that. Also, there was a study, you know me, and I like to refer to some things and go, well, there's the duh factor. But it's important that we get research done on things so that we look at things clearly and say, yes, we have substantive proof. It's not just what I feel, what you feel, right? So there's a new study that was published on May 1st of this year in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders. And Dr. Paul Shattuck, an associate professor at Brown School at Washington University in St. Louis, has led research on adolescents and adults with autism. And they've put forth a new study about these young adults after they leave school, and here they followed them for the year after they left high school, and here's what they found. Nearly 40% of the youths that they studied never met with friends. Never. 50% never received phone calls or invitations for activities. 28% were socially isolated without any social content. Any social contact. Very important that we step up in our efforts to make sure that these kids have some social contact. And a bunch more things that I'm not going to get to, Nancy. Nancy had all this prep. But a couple of events that I want you to know about. First of all, CARD is having the new assessment center in Woodland Hills on Wednesday, May 22nd from 5:30 to 7:30. They're having an open house. You need to RSVP if you're in the Southern California area and you're interested in seeing what the new assessment center holds and what will be done there. You have a great opportunity to meet Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh at that event. You also have the ability to meet Evelyn Kung, who is the head of clinical here at the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, and also Evelyn Garcia, who is the head of the assessment center. So I want to encourage that. But again, this weekend, we had Lisa Ackerman from TACA on this weekend. Her 11th annual Real Help Now conference is happening this Friday and Saturday. You don't want to miss that. Go to tacanow.org. While you're there, you might want to register for a really fun event that they have, their yearly annual picnic. It's quite the event. And this year it is happening on Sunday, June 2nd. So check that out when you go to tacanow.org. That's about all that we're going to have time to get to. I want to remind all of you that we are back tomorrow. We've got some really exciting stuff planned for you tomorrow, but we will not be doing a live show on Friday because we're heading out to the Real Now conference. So only back tomorrow, but we will be taking your questions. A lot of you have written in and we haven't had a second to get to it, and so we'll get to some of that. Some of it we'll save for next week with Dr. Doreen. So we'll be back tomorrow. Until then, please give your kiddos a hug from me. Bye-bye for now.